The numbers wouldn't stop. That was the first thing Alex noticed every morning. Not the gray fluorescent light stuttering to life above his desk. Not the smell of recycled air and cold coffee. Not the sound of keyboards chattering like teeth in January. It was always the numbers. Someone always needed the numbers, Alex. Maria leaned over the partition, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look permanently disappointed. Projections for the Eastern grid. Kinsley wants them by 9. He nodded without looking up. His fingers moved across the keyboard, not really typing. The cursor blinked. Outside the window, one window, narrow, wire-meshed glass. The city moved in its gray procession. Buses, pedestrians. A dog on a leash nose to the pavement, working something out. Alex watched the dog for a moment longer than he should have. The numbers, Maria said again, not unkindly. Yeah, he said. I know. He'd worked at Lumen Systems for how long? He tried to count back and found the calendar in his mind curiously smooth, like a stone worn flat by water. 2 years, maybe 3. He remembered his first week, the orientation lunch, the laminated badge with its terrible photo. But the time between then and now was a kind of pleasant blur. The way a river blurs when you stare at it long enough that it stops looking like water and starts looking like light. He liked it that way mostly. The office was open plan. 32 desks in 8 rows. Plants by the windows because someone had read a study, a kitchen with a broken toaster, and a whiteboard where people wrote jokes that were never quite funny. His colleagues were friendly in the way of people who spend 8 hours a day in close proximity to strangers. A warmth built from shared inconvenience rather than affection. Mark from IT, who always brought protein bars and offered them to everyone and seemed genuinely confused when people declined. Jane, 2 rows over, who hummed folk songs under her breath and stopped the moment anyone looked at her. Daniel from accounts, who had a photo of a retriever on his desk and talked about the dog the way other people talked about their children. Alex fit among them the way a stone fits in a wall, precisely, without effort. In the afternoon, he went to the kitchen to make tea. He stood at the counter, waiting for the kettle, and looked at his reflection in the darkened screen of the microwave. A man in his 30s, brown hair going a little gray at the temples, the face of someone who had once known something urgent and had long since forgotten what it was. The kettle boiled. He poured the water. Behind his reflection, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. A shadow on the far wall, just past the doorway, unattached to any body. He turned. The kitchen was empty. When he looked back at the microwave screen, the reflection was ordinary. He drank his tea. He did not think about the shadow. The next day it happened again, but in the men's bathroom this time. A shape at the edge of the mirror, present for half a second, and then not. And then on Thursday morning, arriving at his desk, he found that the numbers he'd entered on Tuesday had been replaced with different numbers. Not wrong numbers. Different ones. Ones that added up to the same total but via a route he hadn't taken. He stared at them for a long time. Weird, he said to no one. Very, said a voice. He spun. Standing by the partition, not leaning over it the way Maria always did, but standing beside it, arms at her sides, as though she'd grown there, was a woman he had never seen before. She was perhaps 30, or ageless in the way of people who have spent too long outdoors or under pressure or both. Dark eyes, shadows beneath them, a jaw set with the particular tension of someone suppressing urgency. She wore the building's visitor lanyard, yellow, but she was watching him with an expression that was not the expression of a visitor. You changed the numbers, he said. No, she said. You changed the numbers. In 2019, in the third quarter margin report, you put them back to where they should have been because someone in your position always does. They always find it. She paused. You've been doing it for 8 months and you don't know why. I don't know you, Alex said. My name is Natalie. She said it the way people state their names in places where names carry weight, not as introduction, as evidence. I need you to listen to me carefully, and I need you not to call security, and I need you to understand that what I'm going to tell you is going to feel wrong. Like a shoe on the wrong foot, you'll want to dismiss it. Don't. Around them, the office hummed. Mark walked past with his protein bar. Jane was humming something in a minor key. Tell me, Alex said. She sat down in Maria's chair. She placed her hands flat on the desk between them, and he noticed then that her right hand carried a scar across the knuckles. Not a clean scar, not a surgical one, but the kind of scar that comes from something that happened too fast for care. She looked at him, and her eyes were doing something he couldn't name, searching for something behind his face. Your name isn't Alex, she said. That's the first thing. He laughed. It came out wrong too high. Your name is Darren, she said. Darren of the House of Dara. You're the commanding general of the Chemgith Alliance, which is a coalition of 11 worlds in what your people call the Second Meridian. You've been missing for 3 years. 3 years in our time. She glanced at the window at the gray familiar city beyond the wire glass. This, a pause, a small controlled breath, is not real. The fluorescent light buzzed. A phone rang 3 times and stopped. Not real, he said. A fabricated environment, constructed by a species your people called the Vethshar. We call them the Shadows. You were captured during the retreat from Mirith Station and placed here in this so that they could extract things from you. Intelligence, codes, the location of the Chemgath command network. She looked down at her hands. They're patient, they've been, letting you settle, getting you comfortable. And then every so often, they run a sequence. And in the sequence, someone hands you a data problem. And without knowing what you're doing, you start solving it the way you used to solve it. The way Darren Dara used to solve it. The numbers, he said. The numbers, she said. He looked at the keyboard under his fingers. He thought about the reflexive way he'd rerouted those projections on Tuesday. The almost physical satisfaction of it. Like fitting a dislocated joint back into its socket. Something he hadn't questioned because it had felt native. You have proof, he said. It wasn't a question. She reached into her jacket and removed something that did not belong in any office he had ever worked in. It was a disc, flat and dark, roughly the diameter of a coin but thicker, and at its edge it emitted a pulse of light, so briefly it might have been an error of the eye. She set it on the desk between them. Touch it, she said. He didn't want to. The not wanting was sharp and specific, the way you don't want to press a bruise. He reached out anyway. The moment his fingertips made contact, the office flinched. Not visibly. Nothing moved that he could point to afterward. But the quality of the light changed for a fraction of a second. A cold bleaching, like a photograph overexposed, and in that fraction of a second he was somewhere else. Or rather, he remembered being somewhere else. The memory arrived not gradually but all at once, the way you remember a dream the instant you smell the thing that was in it. Stars. The cold of a hull. A tactical display in shades of amber and red, showing retreat vectors for 11 ships, and his own voice, giving the order to scatter, because if they scattered some of them might survive, and the alternative was none of them. Then the fluorescent light and the keyboards and Jane humming her minor key tune. He withdrew his hand. He put both palms flat on the desk and breathed. How long, he said, and his voice came out differently, lower and steadier than he expected. 3 years, 4 months, Natalie said. By our time. How did you get in here? The Vethshar maintains this environment through a substrate relay. Think of it as, they dream you, but they have to keep dreaming you. They can't just set it going and walk away. There's a crew. And the crew makes mistakes. We've been watching for the mistakes. She leaned forward slightly. There is a way out. But it requires you to let this go. She meant the office, the desk, the buildings, and the city, and the accumulated ordinary weight of 3 years of not quite life. He understood that. He also understood something else, something that had been pressing at the underside of his thinking since she'd sat down. What happens if I leave? He said. Something moved across her face. Not hesitation. Grief, maybe. The kind you manage. The war with the Vethshar, she said carefully. Without you, without the command network, the Alliance lost 3 systems. We lost Mirith Station permanently. We lost the Chemgath relay at Edris Point. A beat. We held everything else. But she stopped, started again. It's been 3 years. We've held, but we haven't won. We can't win. Not without you. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. At the buses and the pedestrians and the distant sound of rain beginning somewhere. It looked real. It had always looked real. That was, he supposed, the point. Prove it to me one more time, he said. Not the disc, something else. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, when you gave the order to scatter at Mirith Station, before the Vethshar took you, you were on the bridge of the Dareth Prism, and your communications officer, a woman called Senna, young, barely out of the academies. She asked you if you were sure, and you said, he closed his eyes. Not even slightly, he said, but do it anyway. He opened his eyes, the city was still there. The rain was falling steadily now against the wire glass. Mark was walking back from the kitchen, chewing. Jane had stopped humming. Okay, Alex said, or Darren said. The two of them still learning to share a name again. Tell me how we get out. The escape route, Natalie explained, required the same thing that had brought her in. The substrate relay had to be interrupted. Not destroyed. That would kill him. His consciousness snapped too quickly for transfer, but interrupted. destabilized long enough for her to push a physical signal through. There were 2 people on her team outside, on the actual outside, in the cold, real dark of a holding bay in Vethshar-controlled space. They had equipment. They had been here twice before and been turned back. She had come in alone this time because 2 sets of biometrics were harder to mask. "What does it feel like?" he asked. "When the relay interrupts." "Like falling," she said. "Like everything you thought was solid turning out to be a sound that someone stops making." He nodded slowly. "And the rest of your team? What's their extraction route?" "Through the holding bay and into the ship we came in on. The Vethshar don't know we're here yet. We have a window." "How long?" She checked something on her wrist, a device that didn't look like the office-issue watch everyone else wore. 40 minutes from now. Give or take. He looked around the office one last time, the plants by the windows, the whiteboard with its almost funny jokes. Daniel's photo of the retriever. He thought about whether any of them were real, whether the Vethshar had constructed them with enough resolution to house a genuine experience, or whether they were scenery, puppets on a rack behind the performance. He decided it didn't matter. He decided the question itself was a trap, a way of making leaving feel like abandonment, which was exactly what the Vethshar would want him to feel. "My things," he said. "There are no things," Natalie said, not unkindly. "There's only you." She led him toward the back of the office, past the kitchen, through a door that opened onto a stairwell he didn't remember existing. The building had a basement. He'd never had reason to go there. The stairs went down past the ground floor and into a sublevel that smelled of concrete and cold, and something else. Something that had no analog in the fabricated world. Metallic and ozone-edged, and as they descended the simulation began to stutter. Not violently, subtly the way compression artifacts corrupt a video stream. A flicker at the corner of vision, a sound slightly out of sync with its source, the concrete wall beside him briefly showing a texture underneath that was not concrete. He kept walking. The nausea came and went in waves, the wrongness of it, the gap between what his eyes said and what some older bone-deep part of him knew. "Keep moving," Natalie said from behind him. "The dissonance gets worse before it clears." At the bottom of the stairwell was a door, and beyond it was nothing like the office building. It was a corridor, functional and dark, lit by strips of amber light along the floor. The smell was stronger here. The air had weight. Gravity pulled slightly wrong, a fraction of a degree off the axis his body expected, and that small wrongness was more disorienting than anything else. More real than the realness of 3 years behind a desk. A man was waiting at the far end of the corridor. Heavyset, older than Natalie by 20 years. His face carrying the particular geography of someone who has spent a long time being afraid and has made a kind of peace with it. He had a device in one hand and a small case in the other, and when he saw Darren his expression shifted. Not with relief, but with something older and less comfortable. The look of a man who has been carrying a weight for years and is about to put it down and isn't sure his back will survive the transition. "That him?" the man said. His accent placed him somewhere beyond the edges of the world Darren remembered. Not Kemgeth, not any human world he could name. "That's him," Natalie said. "He remembers?" "Enough," Darren said. The man studied him. "We've got 31 minutes," he said. "They'll run a maintenance cycle on the substrate at 0400 their time. If we're not out before..." "I know," Darren said. He looked at the device in the man's hand. "Is that the relay disruptor? Disruptor, emitter, whatever you want to call it." The man turned it in his hands. "It'll knock out the fabrication layer long enough to pull you through. Hurts like hell, fair warning. I've been hurt before." "Not like this," the man said, without malice. "Like, imagine every nerve ending in your body deciding it has a different opinion about where your body actually is, all at once." "What's your name?" Darren asked. "Mark," the man said, and then blinked surprised by the word coming out. "No, Marsh. Sorry, I've been monitoring your construct too long. It bleeds." He shook his head. "Marsh, my name is Marsh. I flew the extraction vehicle." "Good to meet you, Marsh," Darren said. Marsh looked at him with the expression of a man meeting a legend and finding it inconveniently human-sized. "General," he said. "Not yet," Darren said. "Get me out first." The extraction chamber was 50 feet down the corridor, a room that was more of a slot, narrow, ceiling low, walls lined with equipment whose function Darren couldn't name, but whose nature he recognized the way you recognize music from a room you grew up in. Not familiar, native. There was a chair bolted to the floor, its back fitted with receivers, its arms with restraints that Natalie helped him into without comment. Kit 6 had been carrying contained a neural bridge, which he attached with practiced efficiency to the base of Deheron's skull, behind the right ear. "The restraints are so you don't thrash," Natali said. "I'll try not to thrash." "You'll thrash," Marsh said from the equipment bank. "Everyone thrashes." "It's fine. How long will it take?" 90 seconds, Natali said. "It'll feel longer." 90 seconds, he said. He thought about the office, the gray city. The dog on the leash, nose to the pavement, working something out. He thought about the order at Mirith Station, scatter so, that some survive, and the 11 ships peeling away into the dark, and the fraction of a second before the Veth Shar had taken him, before the fabrication had descended, when he'd known exactly what was happening, and had not been able to stop it. "I want to ask you something," he said. Natali was checking the bridge connection. "Quickly, the Alliance, 3 years. You said you held. We held. How?" She paused in her checking. She looked at him in the low amber light, and something in her face shifted. An opening. A private weight coming briefly visible. "We held because I told them you were alive," she said. "Every time it looked like it was over, I told them you were alive and that I was going to get you back. I've told them that for 3 years." She returned to checking the connection. "So please don't die in the chair." He said nothing for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Why did you believe I was alive?" "I didn't," she said, matter-of-factly. "Not for the first 6 months. The intelligence suggested capture, but the Veth Shar don't take prisoners, not usually, so the working assumption was key." She finished the check, straightened up. "Then we found the relay signature. The substrate signal. They were broadcasting it on a military band. Encrypted, but Marsh cracked the encryption and there you were. A life sign, a brain pattern, running on their hardware. And I thought," a pause, a small contained thing, "well, there it is then." "There it is," Darren said. "Ready?" Marsh called from the bank. "Ready," Natali said. "General," Darren looked at the ceiling. The amber light strips, the equipment he almost recognized, the cold real air that smelled of ozone and metal and space. "Do it," he said. The 90 seconds were not 90 seconds. They were something outside of time, in the place where duration becomes meaningless, because every point in it is equally and completely terrible. It was not pain exactly. Pain has a location. Pain suggests a body, and what the disruptor did was remove, briefly, the conviction that he had a body at all. He existed in a space between the fabricated and the real, between the office and the corridor, the gray city and the amber light. And in that space everything that had accumulated over 3 years, the small routines, the almost relationships, the texture of ordinary days stacked one on another, came apart like wet paper. He did thrash. He was not aware of doing it. When it ended, he became aware of himself in pieces. Fingers first, then the restraints at his wrists, then Natali's hand on his shoulder, then Marsh's voice saying something about vitals. He opened his eyes. The amber light was the same. The room was the same. He was unambiguously in it. "General," Natali said. He tried his voice. "Present," he managed. "Can you walk?" "Give me a minute." She gave him 45 seconds, which felt like compromise, and then helped him to his feet. The bridge came away from behind his ear with a small, final click. Marsh was already closing the case, moving toward the door with the efficiency of someone who has rehearsed departure many times. "Ship is 3 corridors north," Marsh said. "Veth Shar patrol rotation puts a team in this section in." He checked his wrist. 14 minutes. "We have enough time if we move." "We move," Darren said. He walked out of the extraction chamber under his own power. The corridor looked the same but felt different. Denser, heavier, more genuinely present. The walls were real walls. The floor was a real floor. He put his hand against the surface as he walked, and felt its coldness, the slight vibration of the ship's engines, somewhere below. And the contact was more grounding than anything the fabrication had offered in 3 years. They moved north. The corridors were dark between the amber strips, shadow-pocketed, the geometry of a Veth Shar vessel, which was all function and no comfort, nothing softened or curved, everything at the angle of utility. He cataloged it as he walked. Environmental systems here, power relay there, the sound of ventilation moving air through passages designed for a biology that was not his own. He cataloged it the way he'd been trained to catalog hostile environments. And the training came back not gradually but all at once, overlaying the 3 years behind the desk, the way a transparency overlays a page. At the second junction, Marsh raised a fist and they stopped. A head barely visible in the dark movement. 2 figures. Veth Shar, bipedal but wrong in the proportions, tall than a human at the torso and shorter in the leg, moving with the specific unhurried quality of creatures that have never needed to hurry because they have always been the most dangerous thing in any room they enter. They were carrying something. They weren't looking backward. The three humans pressed against the wall and did not breathe. The patrol passed. Darren counted 30 seconds after the last sound of their footsteps faded, then touched Natalie's arm. She nodded. They moved. The holding bay was exactly where Marsh had said it would be. A broad, low-ceilinged space that smelled of fuel and vacuum, the kind of room that exists at the boundary between ship and space. Their vehicle was in the far corner, wedged between two Vethshar supply pods, its hull panels deliberately dulled, its running lights off. It was small. Smaller than he remembered extraction vehicles being, though he acknowledged that his memory of such things was returning in stages. It was built for speed rather than comfort. Good. Get in, Natalie said. Marsh was already at the controls, stripping the cover off the emergency pre-flight panel. Darren folded himself into the rear compartment, which was cramped in the way of things designed by engineers who prioritized function over human geometry. Natalie took the co-pilot position. 20 seconds, Marsh said. The engines came up, not loud, nearly nothing, a frequency that Darren felt in his teeth more than heard. The vehicle lifted 2 feet off the bay floor, hovering. Bay door, Natalie said, working on it. Marsh's hands moved across the panel. The Vethshar leave their bay doors on automated cycle 3-minute intervals. We're 40 seconds from the next cycle. Can we trigger it early? Not without broadcasting a signal that'll show up on there. Then we wait, Darren said. They waited. The 40 seconds passed in the specific silence of 3 people who have calculated the cost of noise. The bay door opened. Marsh pushed the throttle and they went. The transition from the ship's interior to open space was instantaneous and absolute. One moment, the pressing closeness of the holding bay. The next, the vast and indifferent dark of open space. Stars in their millions. The bulk of the Vethshar vessel receding as the extraction vehicle accelerated. Darren looked through the narrow viewport at the ship that had held him for 3 years, and felt nothing yet. The feelings were there, he could sense their weight, but they were stored behind something that would only open when there was time. They'll have spotted us by now, Marsh said. Running the jump sequence. How long? 4 minutes. 3 if the secondary alignment goes clean. A proximity alert sounded, low, even, informational. Natalie checked it. 1 Vethshar intercept deploying from the main vessel. Fast class. They'll be on us in, she did the calculation, 6 minutes. We have a 4-minute window, Marsh said. Then we jump in 3, Darren said. I told you secondary alignment. I'll take the 3-minute variance, Darren said. Jump on 3. Marsh looked over his shoulder at him. The look lasted exactly long enough to establish that Marsh was a man who did not take orders from people who had spent the last 3 years in a fabricated office. And exactly long enough to establish that Darren was the kind of person who made Marsh want to comply anyway. Something in the eyes, or the set of the jaw, or the particular quality of absolute certainty without arrogance. 3 minutes, Marsh said, and turned back to the panel. Natalie said nothing. She was monitoring the intercept, her hands quiet in her lap, her profile lit from beneath by the instrument panel. That same expression, the one he'd seen in the office kitchen, the one he still couldn't quite name. He thought about what she'd said in the extraction chamber. 3 years of telling people he was alive, not believing it herself for 6 months, and then the relay signature, the brain pattern on the Vethshar hardware. Well, there it is then. He understood the economics of it. The Alliance had needed hope, and hope required a center, and she had made him the center, and she had spent 3 years making that story true enough to hold. He understood it because it was the same calculation he'd made at Mirith Station, scatter so some survive. The cold arithmetic of how you spend what you have. She had spent 3 years on that arithmetic. She had spent them on him. He thought about saying something, and concluded there was no sentence adequate to the weight of it. The intercept closed. The jump counter ran. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, 2 minutes and 20, and in the transit hull behind them the FTL drive charged with a sound like the building of a held breath. At 90 seconds, the Vethshar intercept opened fire. The first shot missed. It lit space to port with a red-edged brightness that threw their faces into sharp relief and left after images. The second shot was a correction, and Marsh jinked the vehicle sharply starboard, a move that threw Darren against the hull, and then the third shot caught the drive housing, and the cabin went briefly orange with warning indicators. Drive integrity at 60%, Natalie said. Calm, clipped, the voice of someone who has practiced catastrophe. Enough for the jump, Darren asked. Unknown, she said, which meant probably. Jump, he said. 40 seconds on the count. Jump now, he said. If the drive fails in transit, we fail. If we don't jump, we're dead in 60 seconds. Jump now. Marsh hit the sequence. The jump at 60% integrity was nothing like a standard transit. Standard transit is a moment of unreality, a fold, a step taken between one place and another so quickly the body barely registers it. This was long. This was like the disruptor in the extraction chair. The 90 seconds of between. The dissolution of location, except it didn't end in 45 seconds. It went on, the FTL drive laboring, the hull shaking with a resonance that suggested structural complaint, and the three of them holding on in the dark with nothing to do but wait and calculate the odds. Teheran closed his eyes. He thought about the dog, the one from the office's window, nose to the pavement. He thought about the way it had seemed to be working something out, not searching specifically, but reasoning, applying itself to a problem with the systematic dedication of something that has only one method, and intends to use it well. He had watched that dog for longer than made sense, from the window of a fake office in a fabricated world. He thought maybe he'd been watching it because it reminded him of something, some quality he recognized without being able to name. The drive sound changed pitch, rising, smoothing. They came out of transit in open space, not the space they'd left. The stars were different, the configuration unfamiliar. The dark around them clean and quiet and unoccupied. No Vethshar, no intercept. Marsh ran a position check and released a breath that had been building for approximately 3 minutes. "We're 12 light hours from the Chemgath relay at Edris Point," he said. "The relay is down," Nidalee said. "We lost it 18 months ago." "I know," Marsh said. "But we're 12 hours from where it used to be. Some will be watching that space. They always watch the spaces where things used to be." He began composing a tight beam signal. "This'll take a while." Nidalee unstrapped and turned in her seat. She looked at Darren with the expression of someone completing a task they had spent a very long time on, and finding themselves, at the completion of it, uncertain what to do with their hands. "How are you?" she said. He considered the question seriously. His body felt wrong still, slightly displaced. The gravity here a fraction different from the ship and from the fabrication, and he was aware of the absence of 3 years of routine the way you're aware of a missing tooth. Not constant pain, but a recurring, hollow noticing. He was also aware, underneath that, of something much older returning. The shape of himself, the actual self, coming back into resolution the way a signal clears when you move closer to the source. "Ask me in a week," he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. The set of her jaw prevented it, or the habit of 3 years prevented it. The practiced suppression of hope. "There's a lot you need to know," she said. "About the war. About what's changed. Tell me, not all of it now, you need." "Tell me anyway," he said. "I've been asleep for 3 years. I don't need rest. I need information." She studied him for a moment, then she began. She talked for 2 hours, her voice even and precise, covering systems lost and held and contested, political shifts in the alliance, military restructuring in his absence, the Vethshar's strategic evolution. They had changed their approach after Mirith, become more surgical, less interested in territory, and more interested in information and key personnel, which was consistent with what had been done to him, which was consistent with an enemy that was learning. She talked about the 3 systems lost, and the 2 nearly lost and recovered. She talked about Edris Point, and what was left there, and what wasn't. Marsh listened without turning around, occasionally interjecting a date or a figure from memory. Darren listened with the complete attention of someone who has been waiting for exactly this. He asked questions, precise, operational, stripping each answer down to its usable core. He stored the information against the command framework that was returning to him in steady increments. The old architecture of how he thought about war, about systems, about the problem of an enemy that was patient and adaptive and had, 3 years ago, managed to take him alive. The tight beam signal was answered 4 hours later. It came back as a pulse of Alliance-coded confirmation. Source location marked a scout vessel, 2 light hours out, already moving toward their position. ETA on rendezvous, 6 hours. Marsh read the confirmation and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Huh, what?" Nidalee said. "The scout vessel," he said. "It's the Dareth Prism." Silence in the cabin. Darren looked at the coordinates. The ship he had last stood on at Mirith Station, giving the order to scatter, watching the 11 vessels peel away into the dark. The ship that had apparently survived. "Who's commanding it?" he said. Marsh checked the signal header. "A Lieutenant Commander Senesi," he said. Nidalee looked at Darren. He looked at the coordinates a moment longer. He thought about a young woman barely out of the academies, asking if he was sure, and his own voice, not even slightly, but do it anyway. "Signal them back," he said. "Tell them we're coming in on manual approach, And I'll need a full tactical brief on the bridge within 1 hour of docking. He paused. And tell them what? Marsh said. Tell them the general is coming home. Marsh composed the signal. Natalie said nothing, but something in her posture changed. A releasing, small and private, a weight setting itself down. The amber light was the same. The stars outside the viewport were different from the ones he'd last known, and the same, and enormous. 6 hours, he would spend them preparing. He would spend them becoming again the person Natalie had spent 3 years insisting existed. He thought about the Vethshar, about their patience, their architecture of controlled information, the precision with which they had constructed his fabricated life. Not cruel, not chaotic, just meticulous. The environment of something that believes it has all the time it needs. He thought about what that belief implied, that they understood endurance as a resource, that they conceived of war as a problem of duration. It was the wrong model. He knew it the way he knew the numbers in the quarterly projections. Not by learning, but by recognition. By the specific certainty of someone who has spent their whole working life thinking about exactly this kind of problem. The Vethshar were patient. They understood patience as an advantage. They did not understand that humans understood it too. That humans had built civilizations on the specific understanding that the weight is not the opposite of the work. That endurance and action are the same motion, sustained. They did not understand what it meant to transmit a lie for 3 years, because the truth needed more time to become real. They did not understand a woman who did not believe in something for 6 months and did it anyway because doing it anyway was the only method she had. They had taken him. They had kept him comfortable, in their patient and meticulous way, extracting what they could while he wandered his fabricated world, working on numbers he didn't understand, watching a dog from a fake window. They had not understood what they were keeping. The Dareth prism appeared on the long-range scanner at hour 4, a bright, clear signature, running without stealth, making no attempt to hide its approach. He watched it grow on the display and felt it. The familiar frequency, the bone-deep recognition of coming home to a place that was not a building or a city, but a thing much harder to fabricate. The specific gravity of people who have been waiting for you to come back. He straightened in his seat. He rolled his shoulders. Once the old pre-mission gesture, the small physical act of putting himself in order. Natalie, watching him from the co-pilot seat, saw it and looked away, and he was grateful for that, for the privacy of a moment that needed no witness. The ship grew larger on the display. He thought, not even slightly, but do it anyway. That had been a true thing then, and it was a true thing now. As true as the cold of the hull beneath his palm, or the weight of the stars, or the smell of the air in an extraction chamber. That was not a dream. He did not know if they could win. He knew the disposition of the enemy, the losses, the terrain of a war that had gone on without him, and would have to be relearned. He knew that the Vethshar were patient and adaptive, and had demonstrated conclusively that they understood how to use time. He also knew Natalie. He knew Marsh, who had cracked a Vethshar encryption because someone had to. He knew Senna, who had taken the scatter order and survived it and kept the ship together for 3 years, and was bringing it to him now without being asked. He knew the 11 worlds of the Kemgeth Alliance, which had held when the arithmetic suggested they shouldn't, because someone kept telling them the center still existed. He thought about the dog again briefly. Nose to the pavement, one method, applied well. The Dareth prism filled the viewport. He unstrapped, he stood. The cabin's gravity was still slightly wrong, and he adjusted for it the way he was adjusting for everything. Not correcting it, exactly, but acknowledging the wrongness and deciding it was workable. Most things were workable. This had always been his working assumption, and 3 years in a fabricated office had not changed it, which was the Vethshar's fundamental error. They had assumed that isolating a person from their context was the same as isolating a person from themselves. It wasn't. Ready, Natalie said. Yes, he said. She opened the docking channel and the Dareth prism reached out to receive them. And the dark outside was full of stars that were real, and he flew toward them. The docking arm extended and caught the extraction vehicle with a precision that suggested someone had practiced this, had maybe practiced it many times. Imagining the scenario, the clamp engaged, pressure equalized, the hatch unsealed with a sigh of air that smelled immediately different from the recycled thin atmosphere of the small ship. Deeper, more inhabited, carrying trace elements of people and machinery, and the long-haul familiarity of a vessel that had been someone's world for years. He was first through the hatch. The docking corridor was narrow and functional. Lit by the same amber strip lighting, he'd navigated on the Veth Shar vessel, though warmer in tone. 4 crew members waited at its end, standing at a loose attention that was trying to be formal and not quite managing it. They were looking at him with the particular expression of people who have been told something repeatedly and are encountering the proof of it for the first time. He recognized none of them. That was expected. 3 years changed the faces in any crew rotation. Behind them, one person stepped forward, who was clearly in command of the welcome, clearly in command of the effort to maintain composure, and clearly not succeeding at the latter. She was younger than he'd expected. Of course she was. He'd last seen her across a bridge in the middle of an evacuation order, frightened and steady at the same time, her voice carrying the question above the noise. Now she had the face of someone who had been carrying the weight of a command they didn't fully want for 3 years and had done it anyway, and the weight had changed the face, and not entirely in the direction of age. Some of it had gone the other direction, into certainty. Lieutenant Commander Senna came to attention, held it. He looked at her for a moment. Then, "At ease, Commander." She came to rest, her hands at her sides, her jaw still working at something. "General," she said. Her voice was level. Nothing in it suggested the 3 years. Nothing in it suggested anything other than a professional ready for orders. He respected it enormously. "How's my ship?" he said. The corner of her mouth moved. "Your ship," she said, and the slight emphasis on the possessive did everything the sentence needed to do, "is in reasonable condition. We lost the starboard secondary drive coupling at Mirath during the retreat, replaced it with parts from a Veth Shar debris field 6 months later. The nav array has a resonance issue that our chief engineer has been unable to fully resolve. Everything else is functional." "Marsh was your chief engineer before we picked him up," Natalie said from behind Darren's shoulder. "Marsh is the reason we were able to trace the relay signal," Senna said, with the careful tone of someone awarding credit that was both genuine and insufficient. He'd been running analysis on Veth Shar broadcast patterns for 8 months before he found the substrate signature. He took the extraction vehicle without authorization. A pause. "I authorized it retroactively." "Good call," Darren said. He moved through the welcome party, which parted with the particular involuntary deference of people, in the presence of someone whose authority is structural rather than performed. He didn't use it, didn't perform it. He simply moved as though the ship were already familiar, which it was, in the way that anything you've spent enough years aboard becomes familiar. Not the details, but the bones, the way weight sits in a corridor, the angle at which a bulkhead curves away from a main junction, the frequency of the engines in the deck, plating under his feet. The bridge was 2 levels up. Senna fell in beside him as he walked, and the others fell in behind. And it was not a procession, it was the organic formation of people adjusting their orbit around a changed center of gravity. "Tactical situation," he said as they climbed. "Veth Shar have been quiet for the last 6 weeks, Senna said. Before that, they ran 3 probes against the Chemgath outer perimeter. Not full incursions, intelligence-gathering passes. We repelled all 3 but took casualties on the 2nd. The Alliance Command has been meeting in extended session for the last month. A beat. They've been discussing terms." "Terms," he said. "Negotiated withdrawal from the 3 lost systems," she said, "in exchange for a Veth Shar commitment to hold the current boundary." Another beat, calibrated. "The proposal has support." "Of course it does," he said. 3 years of holding ground without a commander worth the name will do that." He said it without heat. It was an observation. "Who's leading the opposition to terms?" "Councillor Veth Marath's bloc, the Deep Systems representatives, who stand to lose most if the boundary holds where it is." She hesitated. "And some of the military command. But the Alliance Council has been meeting without you, so the military voices carry less weight than they should." "They'll carry more weight now," he said. She said nothing, but her posture shifted minutely in a direction that was not disagreement. The bridge was as he remembered it, structurally and different in every human particular. New crew in most stations, the tactical display updated with 3 years of new cartography, the command chair showing the particular wear of many different people using it with varying degrees of comfort. He did not go to the command chair immediately. He went to the tactical display and stood in front of it and absorbed what it showed. The lost systems were marked in gray, the contested zones in amber. The Veth Shar held space in a cold, deep red that spread from the upper left quadrant of the display like a slow, patient tide. The Chemgath Alliance space was smaller than he remembered. Not catastrophically smaller, but smaller. He studied the boundary. Natalie came to stand beside him. She looked at the display alongside him, And he was aware that she was doing the same thing he was. Reading it the way a person reads damage assessment after a long absence. Quantifying the gap between what was and what is, doing the private arithmetic. The Veth Shar probes, he said to Senna. What were they targeting? The first and third targeted relay infrastructure along the outer perimeter. Standard pattern mapped the gaps. Senna moved to the display and indicated a cluster of points along the boundary. The second was different. It went deep, past the perimeter, toward the Chemgath relay reserve stations. We intercepted it before it reached the first station, but it had already been broadcasting for 20 minutes. Broadcasting what? Unknown. Encrypted, same class of encryption Marsh cracked to find your substrate signal. Senna looked at the display. He's been working on it for 6 weeks. Hasn't broken it yet. What does he think it was? He thinks it was a locator pulse, Senna said. Looking for something specific in our infrastructure. Looking for, she stopped. Recalibrated. Looking for the new command network. The one we built after Mirath, after we lost the original. Dehiran looked at the cluster of points on the display. He thought about the Veth Shar, their patience, their architecture of information. He thought about what it meant that they had been probing for the command network while he was still in the fabricated office, still running quarterly projections, still working on numbers whose origin he hadn't questioned. He thought about what would have happened if Natalie hadn't found the relay signature when she had. They were waiting for me to give it to them, he said. Senna looked at him. They were running the substrate sequence, he said. The fabricated environment, the numbers, the projections. Slowly, over 3 years, getting me comfortable enough and deep enough in the routine that when they ran the right sequence, I'd solve the command network architecture the same way I always solved it, without knowing I was doing it. He looked at the display. How many sequences did they run? Senna checked something on the station beside her. Marsh's analysis identified 11 substrate activation events in the last 8 months alone. 11, Dehiran said. You never gave them the network, Natalie said. The coordinates never appeared in their broadcasts. We monitored. I know I never gave it to them, he said. I didn't know what I was solving. The numbers were wrong. I could feel they were wrong. Some part of me could feel it, so I corrected them, every time. He paused. I was sabotaging my own extraction without knowing it. The bridge was quiet. The tactical display pulsed with its amber and gray and cold red. He turned to Senna. I need the full network architecture. Current disposition, all relay stations, command nodes, the reserve route they built after Mirath. Everything. I can have it ready in 20 minutes. You have 15, he said. And I need a secure channel to the Alliance Council. If they're meeting about terms, I want to be in that meeting before they finish the sentence. Something moved across Senna's face, not quite a smile, but its structural precursor, the arrangement of muscles that precedes one. She came to attention again briefly, from habit or from something else, then let it drop. Yes, General, she said. He turned back to the display. Natalie was still beside him, and after a moment she said quietly enough that only he could hear. 3 years. 3 years, he said. And they never got what they came for. No, he said. He looked at the boundary line on the display, the cold red tide. He thought about the Veth Shar's model of war. Patience as a resource, duration as a weapon, the belief that anything could be extracted from anything if you controlled the environment and waited. It was not a wrong model. It had worked for them, presumably, in whatever wars had preceded this one. It had many genuine advantages. It had one flaw. It was the model of something that had never encountered anything patient enough to beat it at its own game. Something that could spend 3 years in a fabricated world and come out the other side not broken but reconstructed. Not despite the weight but through it. The same way you don't become a general by never being afraid, but by being afraid and holding the line anyway, so many times that the holding becomes the deepest available response. Tell the council I'm coming, he said. Tell them the general is back and the terms discussion is tabled until I've been briefed. He paused. And tell them to have coffee ready. Real coffee. Not whatever they were drinking in that fabricated kitchen. Natalie's mouth did the almost smile thing again. This time it finished. He turned back to the display, and the stars were real outside the viewport, and the work was waiting, and he was ready to do it.